saying, what what was the headline that we wrote for the five? What was it? The top 5 things that make VDI the best, or what was it again?
Yeah, I don't have anything on that, but just like why VDI type thing, I think is what we were going after.
Okay, so what I think, I mean, if you can do, I don't know if you can just do it off the cuff right now, but just go through your list of 5 things and kind of, I want to keep it under 10 minutes. If it's longer, no big deal. They can write more. I'm good with whatever happens. I'm curious how it'll work. Maybe it'll only be 5 minutes. I don't know. I guess let's see what it does, and we'll just kind of go off the cuff type stuff.
Well, let's just do it now, don't you think? Let's just go through each topic and spit out a couple key notes, and then we can always add stuff later. Sorry, Dan.
No. Do we need to like describe what VDI is first, and then like?
Yeah.
And then
I think what we should do is describe what VDI is, and then say these are the top 5 things that I see VDI being the best for, or the reason you want to do VDI.
And this doesn't have to be anything professional. It could just be like we're all talking here, like because.
Yep. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'll probably cut out this first starting part of it, but then I'll just say here's the recording. Try and write to this and write a blog article from it. So,
what it's designed to do, Dan, is so you and I don't have to try to write this stuff, which sucks. We can just talk about it, and someone else writes about it.
Okay.
So, so just describe what VDI is, and then go through your top 5 things that you see the best part of VDI.
Okay. So VDI is the concept of hosting a desktop, an end user's desktop, virtually on a centralized server. So when an end user sits down at a computer and they type their username and password, their desktop is being pulled from a server that's housing the rest of the servers in the infrastructure. So why that's beneficial in a lot of different areas, starting just kind of do like we talked about with the bullets, is management. So from a technical standpoint, the management of let's use an example of 200 desktops in an environment. Instead of those 200 desktops being scattered here, there, everywhere, they can all be centrally managed from that server. So if an end user needs a program added, tech guy or even a company like us can just go to that central server, load a program, and replicate that even up to 200 times. Let's say all those desktops. Or a good example is like, trying to think, like a Java update comes out or a Flash update comes out. Instead of going around, like what typical people do is, or typical technicians, they'll run around to each computer in an environment and install that. Or with imaging software, blast that out. But here we can just log into that central server, update it, and then push that out to the 200 desktops, just re-replicate them. Where that's also nice too, though, from a, like say, that's the technical, like from a technician standpoint, but from, say, a business person or a staff or a teacher at a school, it's also nice too because it allows that technician to respond faster, because instead of saying, okay, I'll put that in my queue because I got to run over there and do that, they could probably just sit at their desk and still do that. Next bullet point.
I'll add another one too. Just my take on that is creating similar environments. So using that 200, for troubleshooting, although we really will argue probably later, there is very little troubleshooting. We're talking about the exact same scenarios. So, you go to, end user A, it's the same exact software, everything's updated the same, the patches, everything is exactly the same. So we can eliminate those first level things that normally you'd have to go, okay, well, what patch are they on? What, Windows, is it 32-bit, all those things get eliminated, and you have that same exact scenario for each user.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I guess hopefully this doesn't confuse the person writing this, jumping back and forth, but kind of going back to what it is. That's a good point, Brandon. Is the idea is we create one master image, and environments will vary. Sometimes you'll have multiple, but we have one master image. We make that change, or we set that up just the way we like. And the way VDI works is it just replicates that master image times, in our example, 200. So it's not like 200 individual desktops. It's like whatever's on that master image, that's what everybody gets. So that's a good point, Brandon. Speed, to me, is kind of another key bullet point, and where speed comes into play versus, say, a traditional PC. I always think about it as, and we'll use this quite a bit in some of these other bullet points, is you're running these desktops on enterprise class hardware. I mean, it's on a massive server and storage array back in the data center. And so speed, as far as how fast you can log into a desktop, open a program, do your day-to-day work, is just increased speed-wise versus a PC that has its own dedicated set of resources. Like a desktop has 2 gig of RAM, a X processor, whatever that might be. Where VDI, you're sharing thousands of gigabytes of RAM and so many processors sharing across those desktops. So it's not like they're stuck to that 2 gig of RAM or one processor. They're sharing resources. So speed is significant. That's one of the biggest things like that we hear when people do it. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so much faster. Good example is like, say, Colstrip or even Sydney. They use Adobe Photoshop, and they were buying like, I don't know, $1,500 PCs just to be able to run the Adobe Creative Suite. And we put it on VDI, even though it's not recommended, but it would launch Photoshop in like 20 seconds versus what they were telling me is like used to be, sometimes would take like 2 minutes for it to finally come up, load your graphic and do your stuff. I don't do any of that, but that's just what they say. So there's a significant speed difference between traditional computing and VDI. Anything else, Brandon, that you've seen out there?
No, I think it's trying to paint that picture of that shared resources. That's really important. And I guess my imagery to it is you think of a pool, like a swimming pool, and when you need X amount, you're scooping that amount of resources as much as you need, and you're using that. And so is the other user. The beauty of that, especially in these large networks we're talking about, is what's going on day to day and action by action is so diverse that what happens when you try to load a local endpoint with that, you're trying to build it for these single actions that happen maybe once or twice a day. Yet if you don't have the resources for it, you can't run the program. What we're able to do now is really we're minimizing the amount of resources you need, but we're putting them all together so we can share it. That way I can say, I mean, instead of thinking, I have, whatever memory on my computer, I mean, you almost could multiply that by 100 at times and say, that's how much, and now all of a sudden you're really seeing things snap because of that shared resource. So that kind of imagery is what comes to mind for me, is just think of this big engine in the middle of these computers around it, and we're just taking off whatever chunk we need. Another piece to that is think of what you do on your computer every second. You get a lot of spikes of what you're doing. You're opening an application, you're hitting a website, and then it tends to plateau. So that's where we can manage those spikes. And since those spikes are going to happen at different times in an environment, I'm hitting the browser now, user B is hitting it in 5 minutes. We can manage those spikes, and they all tend to, fit into that amount of resources.
Cool. So next bullet we had is reliability, and I kind of look at this twofold. So hardware reliability, as far as reliability of an environment being up, and I guess it kind of goes hand in hand, but going back to the hardware is, enterprise class hardware with getting specific, multiple power supplies, multiple network cards, the storage is redundant, mirroring each other. In most environments, that's kind of where the speed comes in, is building that hardware. But the other thing about reliability, and I think why I wrote this down, is the example I always give is more reliability to the end user, because again, they're pulling that desktop up from that server, so they should expect, or they can expect, the same thing every time. And the one we always talk about is like in a K-12 environment, kids go into a lab, and in a traditional lab, you've got physical machines that some work good, some don't. This one's been broken for a while. You go in there and you see the paper that says "Do not use," broken. And but anyway, so the problem is as a teacher, you're trying to teach, and you got kids. You say, okay, let's open up PowerPoint today. Well, these 3 opened up right away. These 4 are still grinding, trying to load. These 3 don't load at all. You can never teach because everybody's on a different pace and things just aren't always working. Whereas in VDI, going back to that idea, is it's coming from that one image. Every user will experience the same thing. So in theory, they should be able to click on that PowerPoint icon. Everything should come up at the same time, and just makes things go a little bit more smoothly. So that's kind of like my idea of reliability.
Yeah, and I mean, you can talk about, like you said, twofold, Dan. You can talk about reliability of having all the horsepower going on one physical machine instead of all these separate machines. That's one way to look at reliability, but reliability to the end user is just as important, or really more important. That's what really matters. But, I think of my day-to-day on a standalone machine. I'll open PowerPoint one day and it'll just snap and it'll be open in 5-10 seconds. Some days I get the not responding and it won't open for 2.5 minutes. No rhyme or reason. It probably has some effects of what else I have going on, but it's always random. You never know what you're going to get.
Right. Next bullet point is device agnostic, and I'm glad we previewed this before, I think, actually, Brandon, why don't you just talk about that? I mean,
Yeah, so, and this is really our kind of niche, or our play on this, is down at the endpoint level. Is another difficult thing for an IT manager or really any network is, no matter how good you are, you're going to have different environments. You're going to have a 3-year-old set of machines and a brand new set of machines, or you might have some Lenovo's or HP's, or you got some people that are working on a tablet. Creates a nightmare for someone to deploy applications to those endpoints, troubleshooting them like we talked about. But what we're talking about, and this is that portal idea, is we're going to give you a portal to this VDI desktop and landscape. So that way I could bring a Droid phone in, I could bring a iPad in, I could bring an iPhone, or I could bring a full desktop. We do not care. We're going to give you an icon to give you access into the portal, so then you have the same look and feel. So you could line up, another way to visualize this, you have 4 machines sitting in a lab. You could have a Droid phone, an iPad, and a Mac, or whatever, and we're going to give them access to that same, whether it's Windows 2008 or if it's whatever it is. Whatever we decide needs to be run as the OS, and for the applications that we run, we just are going to give you access to that. So everything's got the same look and feel. Would that be the best way to say it, Dan?
Yep, definitely. Yeah, it just doesn't matter what it is. We just put the VMware View icon on it, and they pull up their desktop.
And another big thing on that with like buzzwords would be bring your own device. People are wondering how to do BYOD in a business level or a school level. Right now it's impossible because you are inheriting all these issues. But if you go to the VDI and this portal idea, I don't care what you have messing up your computer. We're just going to provide you this access and this application to access this environment that we can totally control. Everything else, we can basically cut that off and say that is not part of what we do. However, this icon brings you into our network. So it's really the only way we see it as a management type company to sustain BYOD.
And the last one we had, and when I was reading this, it kind of just reminded me of what we just talked about. So we can leave it up to the writers to decide how they want to play this. But the bullet is accessibility. And so when I look at that, I think of a lot of what we just said. The only thing I think we could add to it would be the remote access, or being able to pull that desktop up not only from inside your environment when you're at work or school, but at home as well or on the road. And I don't know if there's much to be said on that, just other that we can provide that capability with this technology.
Well, and a lot of school districts appreciate that, having that access and not having to come into schools, or tech directors not having to come into school to make little changes. And I mean, I think that was a big thing with Colstrip with Kim, is that accessibility of being able to log in and see what was wrong. I mean, that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and again, not inheriting. So you got, let's say, students, or you have a business. Either way, you're taking these out into a hotel, or you're taking these to home for a student to use at home. You can't control what they have. You can't control, where are they going to save their files? What about what they're accessing when they're at home? We can keep that environment safe and secure, and just like they're sitting in a lab, we can pull all those policies and security measures in, even though they're on a totally different network, their starting point. So I think that's huge, and some of the key factors too is, and it kind of ties accessibility and speed together, but we've had where we've remoted into our VDI sessions, or had remote access into them, and even remotely from a very minimal, network connection, I'm faster than my a standalone desktop would be. So you think about that, that's very hard for people to grasp that. So you're telling me that I could be remote. I mean, we've even had dialing up on a 3G, dial-up connection, Dan. We've watched that, and that runs faster than a full. I mean, I have a high-powered standalone machine here, and it runs faster than I can run.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
cool. Well, good. I think that's probably good. I mean, you can stop the recording if you guys think we've kind of touched on those things. I think what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to write a kind of list of the top 5 things we want to talk about, go through the recording, and then write a blog to it. So I think that was probably good. It was about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, but I think this is a perfect start to it for sure.
Okay, cool. Now we'll hang up the recording and then